Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a Stellar Parallax stream. I am joined today by the lovely Caesar's Legion and the lovely Rob Saunders, who is the host of the multiplayer Discord. How you doing, Rob? How you doing, Tom?
What's up? Doing
We're
good.
both okay, I think.
Good, excellent. I'm glad actually to be live once again. I've just remembered how to actually do some streaming because this is the first time I think I've been on YouTube in probably 2 years. So this is very weird for me, and I'm glad to kind of be here and sharing with our lovely Armada Free community and our wider Stellar Parallax community. What's going to be the latest edition of Armada Free? So I'm very excited. How about you guys? Are you excited for this?
It should be good. Looking forward to it.
I'm quite excited. Yeah.
It's been a lot in the making. I think when we started this, it was quite a sort of small project that's now gone kind of crazy. So yeah, it's now there. I've got to pull my mic a little bit closer because I've told I'm a little bit quiet. So let's just see if we can sort that out. So guys, if there are any problems with the stream tonight, just do let us know in the chat. I'm going to try and monitor it, but you're gonna have to bear with me because, as I said, it's been a while since I've done this. But yeah, the project itself started out very small. It was going to be basically a balance patch. I started it as that. Tom and Rob came to me and they said, also, dude, these things need fixing as well. And I think it kind of snowballed from there because I think if I start with Rob, it really for you, STA3 is kind of like your bread and butter for your community, right?
Yeah, this is a game that I think for most of us, it's kind of a different pace than other strategy games, and we've really wanted to get a little bit better balance in here for a long time so that we can have more community matches.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, you also had a kind of a different kind of approach to this. You've been playing Armada 3 yourself for a number of years, part of the multiplayer Discord as well, but you've also been helping develop other mods and have worked with myself even on things like Star Wars Ascendancy. So for you, this is kind of a different approach practically and a different journey for you, right?
It's been interesting for sure. I mean, I joined Stellar Parallax, 2016, 2015?
Yeah.
Before I went to university, that's how long ago it was. And I've learned a lot about Sins Under the Hood in that time, really. And essentially, because although I'm very much a Star Trek fan, also a Star Wars fan, I'm a Sins fan, I've played a lot of most of the major Sins mod, as well as quite a lot of stock. And there were just quite a few things highlighted with Armada 3 that, in addition to listening to and reading to all the feedback that we have across ModDB, the Discord, Reddit, and even just playing the game with other people, there were still issues that I wanted to address, and I felt really should be addressed in terms of the longevity of the mod. And certainly one of those things really was, in my case, the planet overview, really.
Yeah.
Because there was such, especially in the lead up to the Final Frontier release, there was an awful lot of lofty aspiration.
Yeah.
In terms of what we wanted. And actually going back through the planet list when I've been revising them, I've discovered even more things that I think Amberenia had wanted to do, never got around to actually implementing. And so there was a lot of bloat, a lot of repetition, a lot of duplication. And so part of what doing this has been about is not just simplifying the planet system, but also making it more consistent, removing some of the duplication, combing through all of the stats and figures, finding any of the anomalous values and correcting them, and just making it a more simplistic experience that still has that classic feel of Star Trek, really.
Yeah, and I think you've done a fantastic job on the planet system. In fact, guys, Tom has been working so hard actually on this planet system. Literally tonight, Tom, Rob, and myself were literally fixing maps, ready to kind of get this out to you as soon as we can. So let me just explain quickly what we're going to do over the next couple of live streams. We're basically going to do a stream very similar to a Call to Arms when we release that version of the mod. We're basically going to do a stream that goes through each faction one by one, because one of the big things that we often get asked is, how do you play these factions and what makes them different? And they do have some unique styles and some unique gameplay, and we really kind of want to show that off to you for the kind of final edition, because although we've said it for a lot of times, this really is the final edition. In fact, it's getting a bit long in the tooth now, and you can see that because while the ships are still gorgeous in ways of comparison to some other mods, as you know, if you've seen Ages of the Federation or Ages of Federation 2 that's being worked on at the moment, you know that there's a lot more that our team, Stellar Parallax, can do now with design and model work and gameplay. So SDA 3 is still a great mod. It's still got a lot of flavour in it, and it's very different from Ages of the Federation and Ages of Federation 2 in the sense that this is the global combat mod. If you want lots of ships on the screen, the SDA 3 mod is the one that fills that need. So this is your very much throw your giant fleet against another giant fleet and have at it kind of mod. And that hasn't changed too much, but there are subtle gameplay differences with this version. And that's something Rob and the guys over on the Multiplayer Discord have been kind of helping us build up to. And that is making all of the ships feel like they have a use. And I think it's fair to say that if we look at the old editions of SDA 3, including Uprising right now, you don't often feel the need to build the smaller frigates or cruisers into the late game. And it's fair to say again that that is something we've always felt needed to change, and very much what Ages of the Federation has incorporated. Well, I'm glad to tell you that the whole focus on this final edition has been to kind of get to the point where we can actually make all of the ships feel like they have some kind of role. And that's very, very hard in Armada 3 because there are a lot of different ships. And Rob, you've kind of suffered a lot personally to this, where you've kind of seen these ships, I think, when you played in the multiplayer matches on Discord in the previous versions, really not feel like they're adding anything to your fleet. And in fact, you tended to spam one or two ships. Is that right?
Mostly it's a stat line ships. So your ships are just a stat line to be buffed by your capital ships. But before we go too much further, there's quite a few people in the chat that are saying that the volume might need to go up a little bit more.
Okay, so is this my volume or your volume? I need to try and follow that through. I'll see if I can get my volume. Okay, let's see if I can tweak my volume a little bit, or maybe even turn you guys down a little bit. Let's see. So, my volume.
Can people in the chat hear us quite well? Oh.
Let's see. Overall. So my volume, let's see if I get even close to Mike. I think I'll be making out with it any time soon. But we'll try and adjust it, guys. As I said, way out of use of OBS these days. So according to this, I'm peaking already. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes, guys. I'll try to do this. If I'm a little quiet, I apologise, but I don't think I can actually get it up any louder than I've already got it. So we will see how it goes. So, okay. So, Rob, do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about what we were just about to say about the actual builds of the ships and why the small ships and sort of the lesser ships don't really get much use in the old versions of SDA 3?
Yeah, so it mostly comes down to the linear scaling of the armor types in the older versions. So the smaller ships' armor types are just really bad, and so they get outdated, those ships, very quickly. And because of the pace of the mod, usually by the time you're engaging your opponent, you already have access to a lot better ships. And all a ship really is, if you think about it, is just it's a stat line to be buffed by other things, by upgrades, by capital ships, etc. And unless there's a reason unless there's something that is niche about each ship, something that it can do well, you're just going to build the best stat line. And usually the best stat line ships are the early to mid game sort of cruisers, and everything else would be neglected. So you'd have fleets of nothing but galores and capital ships, or nothing but like Gortans and Manticores for the Dominion, or Excelsiors for the Federation, etc. and you'd rarely go into the higher tier ships because they weren't supply efficient, and you'd rarely go into the lower tier ships because they couldn't actually kill anything because of their armor and weapon types.
Yeah, and that's basically always been a kind of an issue that's been in the core of STA3, as I've said. So what we're trying to do now is kind of move the mod away from that direction of kind of feeling like these smaller ships don't have adequate punch. And the way we've done that for the first time ever is what we've done is we've tackled something called the gameplay constants file, and this file basically controls how those weapon types and how those armor types interact with each other. So we're basically going to try and run you through how the ships will counterplay today, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each ship one by one. Rob's going to tell us, as is Tom, anything unique about that ship, and also about how and what ships they should be trying to counter with the other factions. So I think it's always fun to start sort of small upwards, and we'll come on to the smaller ships. My fleet decided to not actually get in order. They're not very, very ordersome tonight, guys. So I'm a bit disappointed in the Federation fleet at the moment. It's a bit sad. But if we just unpause the mod for the moment, and obviously we're going to start with our smallest ship, the Nova class. Has much changed with the Scout class, Rob, or is it still just a Scout?
A Scout is still just a Scout. You're not going to be throwing Scouts into combat. They're just Scouts.
Yeah, absolutely. So a Scout ship, the Nova class, while a lovely ship, very, very small, not really designed as a frontline combat ship. It is designed to be a mission explorer. We do still have a few abilities on it. So it has Survey, and it does have Tachyon Pulse. Tachyon Pulse obviously is one of the abilities that allows you to decloak enemy vessels. So there's still some use for Scouts. You should try and send your Scouts out to really find out what the enemy player is doing, whether it be the AI or whether it be an opposing real person that you're playing. Scouts are still very, very useful. So a good ship, but not really going to win you any prizes. Let's try and find the next one. We're going to try and find the Sabre if I can spot it. There's one there. So do you want to talk to us a bit about the Sabre class, Rob, and how this ship now works in the game?
Yeah, so this is a big change right off the bat. It's because of the way we've changed the constants. Your Sabre is actually going to be very effective at killing medium ships. So ships like the Intrepid, or there's let's see, like on the Klingons, the medium ship is the Katinga. So it's basically going to kill your early mid-game cruisers very effectively, and it's going to do this very supply effectively as well.
So you heard that there, guys. So actually what we're saying here is if you have multiple Sabres in your supply, they're very much capable of taking on much larger ships themselves. So taking on the Katinga, taking on the Intrepid class. And you get this kind of swarm mentality where multiple small ships can actually win the day. And that's going to really, really be great when we look at the other factions. So it's something that's going to be really important to remember. And using the Sabre the right way and taking on the right ships, I think, is going to be key. Now, one thing, Tom, that we've tried to do with ships like this, as far as I understand it, is we're trying to make these ships also not necessarily be the best at killing other frigates. Is that the case?
Essentially. I mean, ultimately, what we've got with the gameplay damage rework is part of the problem in older versions is that the way the damage constant scaled resulted in the late game ships being the most effective.
Yeah.
Just full stop. And consequently, the early game ships, although you could still build them if you wanted them for the fluff, they weren't actually combat effective. So what this rework does is it tries to restructure the way the constants scale so that although the early game vessels will remain useful in the early game and through into the late game, it's not to the point that it then eclipses the late game ships in terms of utility. And obviously, in the case of the Federation, the most obvious example of that we'll get to later on. But the thing with these early game frigates and the way we now do the damage constants, there should be, and our testing does seem to reflect this, thankfully, a much fairer outcome in terms of ships that, as Mofun calls highlights, has multi-role and multi-class structure than just one ship spammed winning the day.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say what you're going to see in this now, guys, is that actually having a mix of ships, having a very dynamic fleet, is actually more so in your benefit than just taking one single style of ship. So if you were stacking lots and lots of Defiance before because you thought, well, the Defiant is the best ship to take at the end of the game as the Federation, and you just had Defiance and you went up against a more mixed fleet, you're actually going to struggle. And that's, I think, a very, very key point as we come down. Now, the Sabre comes with one ability. It's evasive maneuvers, and I generally think evasive maneuvers is probably one of the better starter frigate abilities. You've got chance to evade, you've got a max speed increase, acceleration increase, and turn rate increase. So it makes the ship very, very good at one, taking less damage, and two, being that little bit faster. So most of the time you'll probably have your Sabres on auto cast, but it's good to know that any ability in Sins you're capable of hotkeying as well. So that's the Sabre class, your very, very basic starter frigate. Let's move on. Let's find another favourite, which wasn't used very much before, and we're going to go on to the Centaur. So, Rob, do you want to tell us how the Centaur now fits in? Because I think it's fair to say no one really built this before.
No, I never built the Centaurs before. They were just a less effective body as far as a stat line is concerned. I think the Centaur now definitely has a place because in Armada 3 in the past, Strikecraft really haven't been too... well, at least in the recent past, haven't been too prevalent. They haven't been used for a terribly large amount of things, largely due to just their ineffectiveness at killing things like buildings or structures or ships or anything. But now, with the damage types being changed, the Strikecraft are actually very important. There are Strikecraft that are going to shred your buildings quite quickly, the advanced Strikecraft. And I think the Centaur is both a good ship against very light ships as well as against Strikecraft. So you can use this to kind of fight Sabres relatively well, for example, or use it to stop the Strikecraft coming out of Curries or Typhons, or like your bigger sort of carrier ships.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get onto the carrier ships about how important Strikecraft are, what tactics you can now employ with them with some of the new maps that Rob's actually designing for the game. The Centaur itself comes with the evasive maneuvers buff that we just saw on the Sabre, but also comes with the tachyon emission, so it can again look for cloaked vessels. It's quite a good one actually. So if we just zoom out here, you can see that actually the radius effect is quite large. So again, very, very good as a decloaker as well. And most flak ships in the game actually do have a special flak defense buff depending on how many fighter craft are nearby to the ship. So again, a pretty pivotal ship now in your fleet, especially if a player is going to be using lots of carriers against you or sneaking up on you. So don't leave home without it. Moving on, we're going to move on to the Norway class. And Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Norway class and has she changed? Is she usable?
I would still say your Norway. It's a good thing to have in your fleet, obviously, because you're gonna want to bomb planets. That's always the case when you're attacking your opponent. You're gonna want to bomb their planets. And as it has medium armor and anti-light weapons, it's going to do well against things like Sabres, or like Corvettes because of the way that the scaling is now. It'll do well against the lighter ships that aren't. I mean, it's kind of a weird, awkward thing. It'll do okay damage against those ships, but I think it's more usable in general now. It's got a better stat line in general, so that you don't feel bad putting it in there in combat with other ships.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it comes with the Rotate Shield Harmonics ability, which just gives a little bit of shield mitigation, which is actually quite a good ability to have. Anything that gives you extra shield mitigation just helps you stay in the fight a bit longer. Again, probably something you're going to be leaving on autocast when you use her. Let's try and find another frigate. I'm just looking for it. Where with me? Have I got it? Let's see. Bear with me. Did I build a steam runner? That's what I was looking for. There it is. It's right in front of me. So we come on to the steam runner. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about the steam runner class?
So essentially, what the steam runner always was is the anti-light structure. I'd say long-range frigate.
Mm.
So the damage type was always intended to be good against things like turrets and repair yards. That's still the case. But what the Steam Runner is now is essentially your light, heavy hitting vessel. It's got two quite contrasting armor types and weapon types. So with anti very heavy weapons, it will punch well above its weight against things like heavy cruisers, so Akira's, Kveks, your Romulan Falcons, your Galores, your Borg, spheres, reflecting the time period it actually came out in Star Trek lore and its role as a heavy frigate, essentially.
Yeah.
However, in contrast, it's quite fragile. What will steam run or steamroll the Steam Runner are your light-hitting early game frigates. So your Brels, your Shrikes, if I'm remembering the damage constants correctly. Not your Shrikes, your Hawks. Hell, for those of you that are really crazy, you could probably even mass a number of Scouts. If you really wanted to go for that route.
Yeah.
So where the Steam Runner fits in now, it's an early game accessible heavy hitter, but it does come with its own drawbacks in terms of its fragility. And that's generally a theme that follows most of the long-range frigates, which isn't necessarily a bad thing so far as counterplay is concerned.
Yeah. Let me just adjust some volume there for people. So it comes with two abilities. It has this feedback pulse. But basically turns off the enemy's impulse engines. So you can see, if you look at the info cards have always been a problem in most mods, and I think any modder would tell you can never really get the info cards to tell you exactly what you want. But as you can see, this one basically turns off the engines. So very, very, very good ability to have. It's a pulse, as it says, and you can see the area of effect that it can work on when it fires. And we have also the proximity torpedoes. I'll get that right in a second. That do a lot of damage in an area of effect as well, and disable engines and do turn rate. So it's quite a good all-round ability to have and use. Again, you're probably going to leave it on autocast while it's going. So I think that's time to come on to the Corvettes now, which is, of course, the lovely Miranda class. Rob, do you want to talk to us about Miranda and where Miranda fits in now in the game?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the way that the new constants have kind of worked out is that in the early game, there's a bit of a triad of ships that you're going to be finding yourself building. You're going to be finding yourself building your early sort of medium armor cruisers like the Intrepid. You're going to be finding yourself building things like Sabres, which have the anti-medium damage, which counter Intrepids. And then the Miranda is the counter to the Sabre. So the Miranda is very good against those very light ships that it can target. So it will just shred things like Sabres or like the Hawk, the Brel. It will, like any ships like those early sort of starting frigates are going to just get mowed down by the Miranda class.
Great, absolutely fantastic. And obviously they still get this stacking buff as well, called defensive formation. So if you have multiple, I've just moved the chat as well, guys, so hopefully you will see the info cards now, so apologies for that. You will notice that actually you will, as you have more and more Mirandas stacked on top of each other, you will actually see you'll actually see an increase to their chance to hit and chance to evade. So the more you have in a pack, the better they actually function, and it stacks up to 20 times. So again, a really, really good all-round ship. It comes with the target weapons array ability, which again is a fantastic ability as it hits another target, and it can hit capital ships as well as structures. It actually decreases their fire rate, and also means that they'll have a harder time hitting your ships as well. So it's quite useful to have Mirandas around. Really, really good ship. And that's it. I think that's it for the frigate. So I missed a frigate, guys. I think I've got them all. we're going to say that's how I've got them all. See, look, how out of practice am I? I think, did I miss one?
I think that's all of them. All
That
I would
is
say in
all.
addition for the Miranda,
Yeah.
again, this is going back to the damage constant scaling.
Mm.
Whereas in the past, ships like the Defiant had heavy armor type to reflect the ablative armor. What we've done in regards to the late game corvettes is return them to their corvette role. So the Defiant, as we get onto it, has a new armor type, which consequently means things like the Miranda with its anti-very light weapon type will be effective against Defiance. So you have an early game scalable option which will counter Defiance, reflecting the idea that a ship that's small and effective against large targets actually might get beaten by something its own size.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, really, really good ship. Good one you should have in your fleet. Let's start with our first cruiser and let's go on to the lovely Intrepid, which has always been one of my favourite ships. And I must say, the model has always been one of my favourites in Armada 3 as well. It's a fantastic looking model. Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, so the Intrepid is basically designed to kill corvettes. It's got the anti-light damage type, and it has that medium armor, which is basically the counter perfectly to the things like the Miranda in the game. It will also do really good against things like Shrikes, which are a corvette, although their damage type is a little bit differently. It will do well against Raptors. This is basically your kill corvettes ship, and this will also function relatively well against those higher tier corvettes that Tom was just mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, do you have anything to add? Because I know this is one of your favourite ships, right, as well.
Not necessarily. The only thing I would add is the Intrepid is, generally speaking, your mainline anti-cloak ship. It does have the largest range decloak of the decloak abilities. So although the others can supplement with the decloaking, the Intrepid is the most effective at it. So that's all I would really add.
And you can see the range there from the Tashian Pulse Beacon. It also has tactical analysis, which is, again, an ability you shouldn't overlook if you're building Intrepid. You target this at an enemy ship, and actually it knocks down their armour and their damage reduction. Quite good if you're taking on someone like the Cardassians, of course, which are quite heavily armoured, or even someone like the Borg. So again, very, very good all-round ship. Definitely get them built in your fleet, guys. So we're going to move on to, it's parked right here next to it, the Curry class. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Curry class? I think this is often known as the ugly boat of all Starfleet ships.
There's no ugly ship in Star Trek, Keith. Come on, we all ships are beautiful, as Rob would certainly concur with me on. Carriers have always been a bit of a niche thing in Star Trek, and unfortunately that does reflect in Armada 3 as well. I wouldn't necessarily say they are a meta build option. Obviously stock Sins carrier meta was a thing for quite some time, and in some ways still is. But nevertheless, the power of Strikecraft and its ability to supplement damage output definitely shouldn't be overlooked. One of the ways in which, and this is sometimes missed, and again on WodDB, for example, occasionally comes up, the way you capture neutrals was shifted to carriers for the Nemesis release, and that still remains the case now. So if you wish to capture those neutral asteroids in the neutral wells, you will need carriers. So although they're not something to necessarily rant and rave about in terms of let's have 50 of these and let's go nuke a Titan, because if your opponent's sensible and brings a nice chunk of anti-strike craft, might not go too great. The value of suddenly being able to spawn in a wave of Danube shuttles or Mark II Valkyries definitely shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, you mentioned, didn't you, that actually you've seen some new tactics coming up, I think, to me recently, where people are taking carriers as building snipers and just, taking them away from their main fleet because they're not particularly expensive. And before you know it, you've lost quite a number of structures, right?
I actually think that these are one of the most pivotal ships that you can build, not because of their use in your main fleet, but because of their use for capturing the neutral asteroids, which is extremely important to winning in this game. Like holding the neutrals on a map is one of the biggest ways to win. But also because you can do that and then take the group of them that you use to capture neutrals and try to snipe off some constructors or some buildings in your opponent's wells to keep them having to deal with things that you're sending out so that you can focus at home on doing what you need to do and making sure that you can take advantage of the extra money from capturing all those neutrals with Curry. So I think the Curry is actually one of the first ships you're going to want to get out, and it's very important for your presence on the map.
And would you say that you see this tactic quite often in multiplayer games against other players? Has it become something quite core now?
Oh, every game. It's very core. The first thing I ever build in games these days is my ship capturing option, which is usually on most factions is a carrier. So the first thing I rush to get these out as fast as I can to go and contest the neutral asteroids and to give my opponent a headache. Yeah.
So there you go, guys. If you're looking to play with your friends, it's quite important to keep in mind the Curry class and also the other light carriers now. So if you haven't built these before, these may be something you want to consider. But even against the AI, they're quite useful for getting those neutral asteroids and getting your income up. They come with 2 teams, an away team, which is the ability both Tom and Rob mentioned, which allows you to capture the neutral asteroids. But they do have the assault team ability where they can capture enemy cruisers, frigates and corvettes by boarding them and sending over an assault team. So again, very, very good ability. Often we get questions around how the assault team actually works. And basically it works on the premise that if the enemy ship is at quite low health, it will actually flip that to your control. It's not always 100% guaranteed, but it is pretty good. So Curry class, again, the flying canoe, as someone referred it to. And I do see that people are talking about the AI in chat. So just to address it, what we did do in A3 a long time ago is we actually set a lot of the ships to have specific tags in their files that make the AI build them. The AI loves to build carriers, as Tom alluded to earlier in stock sins. And so often we've actually given a lot of the ships the carrier tag so that it will actually trick the AI into building it. And I've always thought that while we haven't always got the AI as perfect as we'd like it to be, given that we can't access the core of it, I think STA3 as a whole has generally done okay at getting AI that's usually pretty responsive. Generally, I think for AI types, we tend to, if I remember right, recommend aggressor, I think it is, in the AI, and obviously to give yourself a bit of a challenge. I will say the AI has changed. And specifically, if you are going to go up against the Borg, you need to keep in mind that with this new version coming out, I've actually increased the Borg AI again. So they're not, whereas in Uprising they were completely balanced across the whole of the AI. If you do choose the Borg as an AI threat, they're a little bit harder. They're not harder that if you put them in, they'll completely decimate everybody, but they've got a little bit of an advantage because of the way the Borg play. But I'm looking forward to talking to that a bit about the Borg a bit more in their faction review when we come to talk about how they now work. So that's the Curry class. Let us try and find another cruiser. Let's find the... Well, we won't go on to the Akira yet. I don't even know if I built a constellation. I'm sure there is one there. If you see a constellation, guys, let me know. Let me know. Did I build a constellation class? I can't see one. Do you want to mention anything, Rob, about the constellation class while I desperately search for it?
Yep.
So, the constellation class... Let's just cruisers. There we go. Let me unpause the game. And we'll get one built. Takes a little while. He's probably gone off to repair something now, in my luck, in the well somewhere. Because that's right, guys. It's still a repair ship. So
have a look at it on the Empire tree.
All sections on standby.
I'll build a new one.
I'll build a new one.
Yeah. Just build a new one.
Where did he go? There he is. He's over there. Look, he's flying off somewhere. He's off to repair something. There we go. So here's our constellation class. There we go. probably made famous because it was one of Picard's ships, as you remember, the Stargazer, was known for the Picard maneuver. But let's talk about the Constellation class. Rob, do you want to talk us a little bit through this one?
I can, yeah, I'll go ahead and do so. So this ship it's not one of my favorites as far as the stat line goes. It is medium armor type and anti-light weapon type, so it's good against corvettes. And if your opponent is putting out a lot of corvettes, it will counter them nicely, and they can support the fleet with their healing buff. But as far as stat lines go on a ship, there are better combat ships for the same role. So it's a bit of a middle ground ship. Again, you can use it to support your fleet, and it does have its role. There are things that it will kill very well, but it's not going to kill them as well as, say, the Intrepid would kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. We did actually buff the repairs in this version of STA3. If you remember, we nerfed them for, I think it was Uprising, so that actually repairs weren't great at all, really. We've increased them a little bit again. They're still not back to their former CTA glory, where you could just build tons of repair ships and do amazingly well. So it is a choice. It's a choice between having firepower in your fleet, which I know Rob very much prefers, or having this middle ground of having a bit of firepower and a bit of repair. It really does depend on how you want to play. But nonetheless, the Constellation is still somewhat usable as opposed to where it was previously in Uprising, which is pretty much trash. So glad that it's kind of returned to the fray. It is a choice, of course, but a good choice nonetheless. Tom, shall we go on to the Excelsior class? I know everybody loves the Excelsior, or the Excelsior / Lakota refit, as it is in this case.
Yes, the Lakota. I mean, the Excelsior. It doesn't matter which one we call it. Essentially, the Excelsior hasn't really changed all that much. Where it has changed is its weapon type. So whereas before, again, going back to the sort of downward scale, the Excelsior sat very much in the middle ground in that it was a heavy armor type and it had an anti-heavy weapon type. So not only was it a tank, it was also a tank that countered itself. Yeah. Which, given the way the old damage constants were, made it pretty effective, but also not very fun. So the way the Excelsior has been changed now is that its weapon type, reflecting its age, it's more of an anti-medium now. So although it's still the heavy armor type, and it's still a tanky core, and its abilities still reflect this, where its damage actually shines is against medium armor targets, so support cruisers, cruisers in general. So if you want to relive a classic Excelsior versus Katinga meta, you can, and who knows which would win. Perhaps someone could investigate that for us.
The Excelsior wins.
I think it's the Excelsior. Yeah. No
Spoiler
Federation
alert.
bias here. No Federation bias here, guys.
Spoiler
alert. So yeah, it's still your relatively cost-effective main ship for the mid game, going even into the late game to supplement your fleet firepower and to try and absorb some damage. The Lakota refit helps it punch above scale into the late game quite well. But that's really where we're at with the Excelsior, as far as I am aware. I don't believe any other major changes have occurred to it.
No, it's pretty bog standard. It still gets the Lakota refit, which obviously increases the hull, the shields, its weapon range, and its speed. So worth researching, because that'll just upgrade all of your Excelsior classes when you get there in the tree. And it still has the electronic warfare ability, which is basically a taunt. So it will force another ship to attack it, and while it does that, it also increases its armor. So it's quite interesting, actually, as a ship, and again, a generally good all-round ship, as you're hearing here.
Yeah, it's very flexible. That's the best thing about it, is how flexible it is. It will really counter those role-based cruisers like the Curry we were talking about earlier, and it will have enough armor against most of the early game ships that it's kind of an ace card to pull out if you go for early tech and you get this quickly. It will be very hard for your opponents to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we talk about? Let's go on to the Akira, Rob, and let's have a talk about our advanced cruiser, or our battle cruiser in this case.
Yeah, so to talk about the Akira, I think it's first important to say that there is still some linearness of the scaling. Things that are higher tier ships will do, on average, a little bit better against each thing below them on the spectrum. And so the Akira, what it's really good for is it's an anti-heavy ship with very heavy armor. So it's going to murder things like Excelsiors. It will murder things like Griffins, and it will perform well in general because there aren't too many ships that have the anti-very heavy tag. So this is kind of your late game go-to ship.
And it comes with some really interesting abilities as well. So we've still got the chain reaction pulsar, and that is an ode back to Armada 2. If you remember Armada 2, the Akira had it there as well. So chain reaction pulsar basically shoots a torpedo that bounces from ship to ship to ship, and it melts things. Now, I think it's fair to say in Uprising it was probably too powerful, and to the point that people were just building big fleets of Akiras. So it has been toned down a little. You can see the damage numbers there. It's still pretty good, and it's still pretty good if you have quite a number of Akiras. But what we've also done as part of this mod is we've changed all the supply costs of the ships as well. So ships are a lot more expensive. So it's fair to say you won't be able to build as many Akiras as you could in the old version. And you probably wouldn't want to either. You want that mixed fleet, that balanced fleet. But it's still a very, very good ability. It still gets its battle refit, which basically gives it better energy weapon cooldown. And then it has the ubiquitous torpedo spread, which again is another good hitting damage ability with torpedoes. So a very, very strong ship, as you would expect the Akira to be. And still one of my favourites as well. A beautiful design, beautiful ship.
It is also
yes,
probably the only cruiser that the Federation arsenal has that's going to do super well against capital ships.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But let's talk for a minute about our kind of special case in the Federation fleet, Tom. Let's talk about the Defiant class, and where does the Defiant now fit in this version?
Well, indeed, as we've alluded to already, the Defiant now has very light armor. It has the same armor profile as Strikecraft. The reason for this is twofold. For one, late game ships, broadly speaking, will have more heavy oriented damage types. So consequently, things like the Akira and the Excelsior won't do great against the Defiant. The Defiant was designed to fight the Borg. It wasn't designed to take direct hits from the Borg, as the wonderful scene in the Battle of Sector 001 shows us. It could dodge the shots, not necessarily going to survive being shot by a Borg cube too many times, though. So we've addressed this by giving it the very light armor type, in the sense that it will still perform very well against heavy targets. It will do very well against capital ships. It will do very well against heavy cruisers. If your opponent is fielding a strong force of Corvettes or Falcons or Griffins or Deathrights, Galores, spheres, pyramids, cubes, the Defiant is your go-to answer. But it is fragile against quite a few of the early game hard counters. So anti-strikecraft frigates, namely the Centaur or the Vulcan for the Klingons, the Lenora for the Romulans, the Osset for the Cardassians, will hard counter the Defiant. I don't feel this is a bad change. The Defiant was pretty potent. It still is very potent, but it's now a bit more of a glass cannon. And if you counter it correctly, it will go down far more effectively than I think it did in previous versions.
Yeah, this is the ship that it's the reason you need to have those early game ships in your fleet, really, because if you just build a fleet of very heavy ships and then the opponent just builds Defiance, you're going to get wiped off the face of the universe.
Yeah, so you're seeing those counters there, guys, that we're talking about happening now. So you can't just build that one type of ship. And actually, if you're playing another player, a human being in a game, as you're playing your friends, then it's really important that you watch what they're doing. So if they look like they're going down a certain sort of build with their fleet, you can adapt and you can counter their fleet and pull out a decisive victory, even if sometimes you're outnumbered. So it's worth just thinking about how you compose your fleets a little bit more. I did see a mention of the summonable ships like the Melbourne and Niagara. I haven't called any of those in, but what I will say is they have been updated to reflect their kind of roles. And what I will say about them is they now all have abilities. So they've actually got things like torpedo spread and volley fire and things like that. So they've all got abilities, but you'll just have to check them out. So they're still in the game. Let's go on to the New Orleans. So Rob, has the New Orleans changed? Is it worth building? Do I need it to take down star bases?
Yes, you need it to take down star bases. Star bases are more expensive and they're a little bit less common, but the New Orleans is also expensive and it's less common to see. This thing, it's going to punch things like star bases very well, and that's what its role is. That's really what it does. I don't think you'd want to build it outside of destroying structures, destroying star bases, but it's a very good ship for what it does.
Absolutely. I just realised I didn't actually go over the Defiance abilities because I was in such a rush. So Defiance still has actually had its abilities changed. So I should mention those. The multi-layered shielding is a new one, so it has shield restore rate and shield mitigation, and it has the agile frame, which means it has a chance to evade, acceleration, and turn rate. So some good abilities on there. It has lost the ability to deploy mines. I'm sure you've noticed that, and the reason is we just felt that the mines are a little bit too. They cost your economy. They're a little bit too unpredictable, uncontrollable. They're quite cheesy, so we've removed the mine ability on the standard Defiant. We'll come on to Cisco though in a little bit. And the New Orleans still maintains its two types of siege mode. You can engage a group siege mode. This is determined by the 3 dots here, or you can go with standard siege mode. The group siege mode obviously just hits all ships around it and that are also New Orleans and puts them in siege mode. Siege mode is still fantastic. It does make them super fragile though, so they need protection, or you need to be really very careful with how you set them up. But they will absolutely wreck face if you have a number of New Orleans, even more so now with the way we've changed damage constants. They'll absolutely wreck stations, and really, really good ship to have in your fleet. Don't want too many though. Very expensive now. Very expensive. So I think that does it for the cruisers. Shall we get on with the battleship, guys? So, yeah, the capital ships, I should say. So where is the Ambassador? So, Tom, the good old Ambassador, is she still glorious?
Oh, wonderful Cardassian puns when we're looking at the Federation. Where's Gull when you need him? The Ambassador hasn't really changed a whole lot since the last release. It's still your colony cap. It is more of a utility/support cap, though, and its abilities reflect this. Quite a few of the Federation ship abilities can be quite antimatter hungry, so the antimatter restore ability is useful in that regard. It still has a shield restore, so it will help it survive in those engagements where it's being attacked. And I think probably, I think Sovereign Echo would certainly agree with me when I say that the long-range scan is probably its most useful ability. Because although scouts are wonderful and we all like looking at pretty novas, when it comes to convenience, there's nothing quite like pressing a button and revealing a gravity well. So the long-range scan, I think, is probably where the Ambassador scales up in addition to the antimatter restore. But, you know, it's still your early game cap. It's still your colony cruiser. Not much has changed in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I did do a long range scan and I've decided I definitely don't want to go to this planet because there are bioships there. So that would be bad for my health. Right next to my home world. So that's the Ambassador class. Let's move on to our next ship, the very, very famous Enterprise D. Sorry. That's the Enterprise D, the Ambassador, of course. Rob, the Galaxy class, how does she fare in the new edition?
Yeah, so I wanna say one thing about capital ships before we continue on, is that capital ships are actually much tankier due to these changes than they were before. So yes. Capital ships are first of all, they've gotten increased stat lines, and second of all, almost nothing is good against them. So they are powerhouses. They are going to stick around in a fight a lot longer than they used to, and they're going to need to be targeted very specifically. And that being said, I think the Galaxy class is a very good sort of early mid-game combat ship. Its saucer separation gives it a huge amount of effective hit points. It has some great direct damage abilities. It's just a fantastic capital ship early on.
Yes, absolutely. And if we look at the source of separation now, there she is, source of separated. You will notice that what I've done is I've actually given all of the both sections of the ship abilities. So now when your source is separated, it won't feel like a wasted ability anymore. If you've got the actual saucer itself, you've got target weapons array, phaser overload, and antimatter spread. So very much, if you wanted to relive that moment against the Borg cube with your Galaxy class where you sort of separate, you can do that now, and it has the abilities. So it's very, very much worth saucer separating because you actually get the increased kind of lifespan of the Galaxy class because it's in source of separation, and it obviously when it does go down to certain health, one of the sections, it will reattach itself, and it will still have some health left. And then if you look at the other section, the engineering section, you will see that we have heavy torpedo salvo, unbound maneuvers, so it's got evasion, speed, etc., and extra shielding, or brace shielding as it's called, so you get extra shield restore rate. So again, some really, really cool features now based on the source of separation. I'm just going to warp her away, and hopefully we'll see a Galaxy class come back. There she is. Whee!
Battle stations.
I also forgot to say antimatter spread is a very powerful ability. Very, very good debuff.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal air effect debuff. Very much one that you'll probably want to have. It's got tachyon beam as well, which is a direct energy beam that's very, very good damage. And of course you have your photon torpedo volley, which never leave home without. Very, 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 very good damage. So again, Galaxy class, pretty good all-round ship. You can see from its stat line there, increased hull, increased shields, very much a feature of the new capital ships, as Rob mentioned there. And again, some good, if you level your capital ships up, or they gain levels, they do become more powerful. Tom, shall we move on to the Phoenix class? And there she is.
The Phoenix class.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's too much to say about the Phoenix class. The abilities, from what I recall, are mostly the same. Surgical Strike is still a very effective antimatter drain and disabling ability. The damage share has been changed now slightly, so instead it's a physical damage reduction.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that might be something we look at before we release, purely because quite a lot of the weapons are energy based. And so the physical damage reduction only really applies to torpedoes. So I think we might want to look to revise that slightly.
Yeah.
And then finally, it's the engineering teams. So complementing your constellations, more shield restore, more hull restore. It's all about that survivability, really, that support and logistic assistance.
I just saw a question coming in there about the Venture refit. This is the Venture refit. You can see the added extra bits, the strips here that have been added. So that's something Max found out how to do a long time ago. So if you do the research, it does add the extra phaser banks onto the Galaxy class. But yeah, the Phoenix, is it still worth having this in your fleet, Rob, do you think, having the Phoenix class?
I like the Phoenix class. It has some nice utility for buffing your other capital ships, especially if you kind of micro what it targets. I think it's a good ship. It provides you a little bit of extra defense, and obviously just the ability to kind of transfer antimatter is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. But Rob, let's go on to its kind of bigger sister, if you like, and probably, as everybody knows, Bane's favourite ship in the Star Trek universe, which is the Nebula class. I even have a model on my shelf right now. So the Nebula class, where does she fit in? Is she still the powerhouse she once was?
Yeah, the Nebula is a machine. Its shield strip ability, I can't remember its exact name, is just disgusting.
Shield Disruptor.
that one ability alone would make the Nebula worth building, but all of its other abilities are also good as well. This is kind of for me one of the main go-to capital ships on the Federation.
So there you heard it there, guys. Nebula, still a strong ship. Obviously has Gemini effect, can clone another ship. Not as powerful as it used to be as an ability, but still pretty good. We talked about Shield Disruptor there. Bounces to different targets and basically strips their shields. So again, a very powerful ship. Don't leave home without it. Both of these type variants also do have an upgrade for their warp core, giving them better ability cooldown rate, which you kind of want because you want to speed up the amount you're pushing those abilities out, and the point defense system just to give itself some damage reduction. So it's just quite a tanky ship as well. So lovely ship, but probably not as tanky. I've got to find the right one. There it is, because I know this is Picard, I think, hiding over here. There he is. But over to the Sovereign class, Tom, and the Sovereign. Again, some people love the Sovereign, some people hate the Sovereign. What about you? Do you love the Sovereign? Do you hate the Sovereign? How do you find it?
I don't hate the Sovereign. I don't love the Sovereign. It's sort of like the middle child. You like it, but it's not necessarily your favourite. I feel like I'm being a bit mean there to my sister. The ability loadout on the Sovereign is, I think, unchanged. I don't recall if any changes were made to it. So it's still got the Corbomite Reflector, a slightly weaker variant than Picard's. It still has the Fleet Coordination ability, which increases the range and chance to hit. So that helps you get in that first salvo. The Expert Targeting, I believe, is it self? Applies to self? Or is it applied to another
I think
target?
it applies to the enemy target and makes their chance to hit worse, from memory. It's a bit like weapon overload.
Yeah, it's one of those abilities that you very much want to stack with, for example, the Miranda's ability, which I believe reduces chance to hit. So a little bit like with the old Romulan capital ships, stacking some of those chance to hit debuffs, reduce the damage output of your opponent. And then Fire at Will, of course, is just a pure damage output. Fire all those photon torpedoes, Mr. Worf. Blow up whatever it is that's ahead of you. And if not, try and ram it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually think the Sovereign is a very good ship. Any ship that can buff your fleet in any way or add a massive amount of effective hit points and is hard to kill itself is a very good ship. I think you definitely want 1 or 2 Sovereigns in your fleet.
Yeah, and it's again, if we look at the stat line, you can just see the phenomenal amount of health a capital ship has now. So these, what I will say is capital ships, and we'll look at this on the shipyards, but capital ships are a lot more expensive now. So you should be prepared to pay the money. That's fair to say. You got to pay me the money if you want a capital ship of this class. So I think that does also affect the gameplay, right, Rob? Where actually you've got to make some really tough choices about when to buy capital ships as opposed to previously.
Oh yeah, and which capital ships you buy. It's very important. And I think like for the Sovereign, it's something that can make it that it is this tanky anyways because of the constants and because of its stat lines, and that has the ability to make itself even tankier and can still buff your fleet and debuff your enemy's ships. This is a very good capital ship.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to move on, Tom, to probably one of the sort of more interesting capital ships that I think it's fair to say it's had a troubled past in STA3. I think it's had a troubled past in most mods, which is the Prometheus class, because people weren't really sure whether it was a good ship to build when you had ships of such quality such as the Nebula and the Sovereign and the Galaxy. Where do you stand on it now in the latest edition? Because it has had quite a lot of changes.
Well, I've always loved the Prometheus. It's I'm a sucker for MVAM style abilities. It's why I like the Galaxy. Even before it had some lovely abilities added in. I believe the MVAM's subsections have had the same ability treatment as the Galaxy now.
Yeah, so you've got coordinated fire on each section, if I can even select them because they haven't really got it. And that basically, each section increases its own weapon cooldown. Obviously, it'll take more damage because it's split apart, but effectively, you're looking at a 40% buff. And what I did was I actually added shield penetration efficiency, which I try not to use too much because it is quite a powerful stat increase. But effectively, 20% of the damage will actually go through
shields
through shields, which
and
is
apply direct to hull is very good. Very good.
Very, very good. So if you do build the Prometheus, I think you're buying a ship that, while not having the durability and the tankiness of the Sovereign, definitely won't disappoint you in terms of firepower. I think it's fair to say.
No, definitely not. The Prometheus is very much a damage output powerhouse, and its abilities have been modified slightly to reflect this. So it does have a new direct long-range phaser blast style ability, which is pretty good. It's not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily going to completely annihilate your enemy, but getting one or two bursts of that before you engage a high-value target, for example, can be quite useful as an opening salvo. It's of course got the extend warp through ability, so if you want to go somewhere in a hurry and take everything else with you.
And can I just say, what a lot of people miss with this is the Borg actually have a pretty nasty ability on their tactical cube, which is called Exterminate. And what that does is that shuts down your fleet's ability to warp. However, what you'll notice about the Extend Warp field, it uses a buff called Warp Interference Immune. So you can't, you having one of these actually protects the Federation a little bit from those tricksy kind of interference abilities. So what a great thing to have. And of course, the phaser overcharge we spoke about, lots of damage output there. 2,000 damage in one hit is it's a lot of damage. And again, you know, that even though some of that will be absorbed by enemy shields and stuff like that, if you look across the Federation, while they have things like torpedo volley which do 520 damage, this is one of the abilities that probably does the most damage on any Federation ship as a direct damage ability.
If there's a single target you need to take out and you have 2 or 3 of these and you make sure to target that fire, like that beam at those targets, you'll take them down a lot quicker. It's really good for taking out a target.
And you know, going back to the new tactical tactical meta that we're trying to develop, you know, combining it with the warp field, you will be able to effectively hit and run whatever target it is that you're trying to snipe. And so if your opponent isn't wary of that, you know, it can come back to bite them in the arse.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got Assault Run, which again is another good ability. Gives you evasion, gives you speed, gives you turn rate. And it's fair to say that the Prometheus is actually a lot faster. And that's one of the things that's always bugged me about Sins. It doesn't really show you the speed of the ships. But I can tell you this, the Prometheus is a lot faster than a lot of the other ships in the Federation fleet. So if you do run it on its own, along with some Defiance, there's a few hints there, you can actually have a very fast hitting fleet that hits very, very hard. And is good, and I think
quite capable of escaping.
Which is important. And I think, Rob, what we've seen, at least, or what you've told me from some of the multiplayer games now, is people aren't really deathballing their fleets as they used to. They're kind of spreading a lot of ships out. Well, they're still building fleets, but there's sometimes 1 or 2 or 3 fleets now. You know.
Yeah, I've played games where there's 5 fleets at one time, where you're fighting in 5 different places. You've got 2 different things you're harassing, 2 different main places you're pushing, and like you're running around trying to snipe buildings or something, or snipe tech with another group of ships. And having something like what you just described with like 2 Prometheuses and a few Defiance, if there was a vulnerable capital ship or 2 somewhere, you could fly in and snipe them very quickly, and that would be devastating to your opponent, because capital ships are so valuable now. They're so expensive.
So, Rob, while we're on the subject, let's move to another sort of capital ship that often has been overlooked, I think it's fair to say, in the past, but actually is pretty amazing, let's be honest, and now in this edition. And always has been quite strong, but as I said, overlooked. What do you feel about the Typhon and now?
So this is my favorite Federation capital ship by far. This thing can take a lot of damage, and its strike craft, as it levels up, just if you get the bomber strike craft, I mean, you can take those if you have got 5 or 6 of these and just snipe capital ship after capital ship, building after building, just give your opponent such a headache with the value you can get. You can fly into the side of a well, snipe some high value targets, and then just fly away without taking much damage at all. This thing adds an amazing stat line to your fleet. It's very tanky. And on top of that, it can seriously deal a ton of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're obviously very fond of this model in the team. because this was made by a lovely developer called Amagosa, who sadly passed away during the production of STA3. So, you know, just seeing, and he also built a lot of the other ships as well, including the early Defiant. You know, but this was the one that we always remember him by, and it is a fantastic model. We're very happy to have it in the mod. And a great all-round ship. It comes with, obviously, shuttle bay expansion, increased the amount of strike craft and squadrons you can field, rapid launch protocols, which is, when you level a Typhon up, it gets pretty insane. But that one ability, obviously, if you are losing bombers and fires, they will respawn quite rapidly. So very, very good to have. Fortress mode basically turns into a fortress, so if you do get ambushed, it's very slow, but it becomes into sort of a bit of an impenetrable brick. So a great ability. And then, of course, the point defense system, which gives it, again, another way to increase its defense by giving you that all-important damage reduction. And it has some stonking health. Again, a very expensive ship, though, so it's a real choice about when to build these, but I have seen in some of the games I've watched, players just taking one of these off on its own, even to scout out into enemy's territory where they're not expecting, while pushing somewhere else, and just literally destroying all their research stations because of the amount of damage those Valkyrie Mark IIs put out, which is something unique, I will say, to the Federation. While everybody has elite squadrons, the Valkyrie program is still the strongest fighter craft and still the strongest bomber craft in the mod, so totally worth building this ship and those fighters and doing that upgrade if you can do it. And that kind of brings us to all our Federation ships, barring one, because I forgot to spawn it because I'm foolish, which is the which I will do now. So I apologise. I forgot the Titans. So while I'm spawning them, do you want to talk to us about how Titans fit into the game now, Tom?
Oh, blimey. Dump that on me at once, then.
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry.
In terms of Titans themselves, at the moment, they're largely unchanged.
Yeah.
Of course, damage constants do naturally reflect the changes. So, broadly speaking, Titans and capital ships have followed the same sort of line in the damage constants, in that most vessels don't do a great deal of damage to capital ships. The exception being getting into the heavier damage types. So this is where, for example, the Steam Runner is important in the early game, because all capital ships now come with very heavy armor. And so consequently, you want to be having they have capital ship armor. But your anti-heavy is 0.5 damage to capital ships out of every one, and anti-very heavy is 0.75 out of every one damage to capital ships. So Steam Runners, being your early game anti-very heavy option, are consequently naturally your counter to cap ships in the early game, and this applies to all cap ships. They have uniform armor types now. So this is partly why, in addition to the additional shields and hull, capital ships are now actually very tanky. Titans follow this same rule, essentially. Anti-very heavy is 0.5 out of every 1 damage will apply. Anti-module still has that little niche, I suppose, and again, 0.5 out of every 1 will apply to Titans. So anti-very heavy and anti-module are still the 2 damage types to go. But Titans, as a result, are now far tankier than they were. Because in some respects, Titans could be countered pretty hard if you weren't careful and got overwhelmed. So now they've got a bit more survivability. So although their ability lists and loadouts haven't changed, which, to be fair, I think we got some pretty good ability loadouts on the Titans across the board.
I would say so. Yeah, I think the Fed ones are to me. I think the Fed ones represent the overall kind of middle ground in Titans. They're not like, they don't have the all-out killiness of the Scimitar, for example.
No.
So the Polaris is kind of the offensive one. The Excalibur is the defensive one. But they are so good for the fleet. that taking either of them is good. And I would say out of the two, obviously my favourite's always been the Excalibur, and I will note that we've updated the model in STA3. Well, Max has done a lot of work on it, so you can see this is a lot more detailed. You've now got the black plating on this, and again, if you ever loaded up the game and want to look at the model, definitely do so, because this is such a beautiful model, really well built by Max. But this is definitely the one I would pick for the kind of, I want it to go along with my main fleet. You've got for the Federation ability, which is a hull repair, increases your damage output, increases your hull restore rate. So it's your general, I'm gonna repair you, but I'm also gonna make you really, really good at putting out damage. You've got a Verteron generator, which is that warp interference on the enemy fleet. So if you want to stop them from running away from your fleet, it's a really good shit for that. It is quite slow, so it can be very tricky to maneuver it. But if you manage to do that thing where a fleet jumps in and you catch it off guard, Verteron generator is definitely a great ability to have. United Defenses, which obviously does shield restore rate, and shield mitigation. And again, it's a fleet buff. And if you look at that size of that buff, that's just phenomenally big. So it can cover quite a large area. And again, really, really good. That shield mitigation just adds so much tankiness to the fleet. It's kind of like you almost don't want to leave home without one, And then strategic command, which again is a damage reduction buff. So effectively, it is the Federation's, it's classed as the Federation's space control ship. It is something that's going to make your fleet incredibly tanky and strong, and give the Federation fleet a really good staying power in combat. And then you've got the Polaris, which is again a beautiful model, which was built by Wiley, and then Max has done some modifications to it as well, which is your kind of more offensive one. So you've got obviously the Quantum Torpedo Volley, which does quite a lot of damage to a lot of targets. So you can see it hits 10 targets. You've got the adaptive shielding, and this will again increase by the more targets that shoot it, the more powerful the shielding becomes. The Gemini Assault, which is where it basically clones itself, and it does a kind of temporal assault run, so everything gets frozen basically. I can't do anything while it attacks. And then the temporal shockwave. Sorry, that's the one that freezes everything. I always get these two run around. Gemini Assault splits you in two. The temporal shockwave is the one that freezes everything.
Freezes the gravity well. Yeah.
Freezes the gravity well. So it's quite a cool ability.
Hammer time.
Time stop. Yeah. I mean, I think both have their place. For me, it's the Excalibur. Rob, what would you say? Excalibur or Polaris for you?
It's hard. It depends on what kind of fleet composition I'm going for and what I'm trying to do. I actually really like the Polaris for kind of flying around and slowing my opponents down and stopping their fleets in wells when I want to attack somewhere else. Like, it's so powerful if you're about to attack on one side, to freeze your opponents for 30 seconds or however long in another well. It can be devastating. So it really depends. I think anything that buffs your fleet is super good, and so the Excalibur is a very, very good ship for a direct combat scenario, but there's a lot of cheeky things you can do with the Polaris. So
yeah, absolutely. So what I think we're saying here, guys, is that all the changes we have made in STA3 with the armor types, they play really well into the way the ships were already built around their abilities. And because you're no longer building necessarily all these death balls, and if you want to play well, you're splitting your fleets up quite a bit. Actually, you're getting a much more involved gameplay when you're playing against other opponents. If you're playing again with your friends and you've got a group of you, there's some really good tricks that you can employ against your friends. So again, really, really nice dynamic gameplay is kind of what we wanted to go for with SDA3 and the fleet combat. So that's the kind of main shits, but I know everyone's going to scream at me if we don't talk about the heroes. And I think it's fair to say the heroes themselves have had quite a few changes. So, Tom, shall we start with the USS Voyager or Captain Catherine Janeway?
I'm afraid you're going to have to refresh my memory in terms of the changes. I believe ablative armor.
No.
I believe ablative armor has been changed.
The ablative armor has been changed. It has to change. It's still pretty good. It still gives you 999 armor. So
it's still insane.
It's still insane. No, the duration's changed. So before, you were able to basically level up to the point that she could have it up for a full minute. And often you would play the game and you would see Janeway just flying around. So the entire Federation fleet gets shot. Janeway will still be alive. So like even your Titan would be dead, but Janeway would just be going like, "Yeah, you can't hurt me. I've got ablative armor." So we've reduced the
sitting in the ready room sipping coffee.
Yeah, she's just sipping her coffee, like, you know. So we
The entire fleet's firing at her. Explosions everywhere. Drinking a coffee.
She just went die. So we and I think because she's an early game hero, there were lots of issues, and like when you compared her to like Kern or Golden Cut, you know, she was definitely the strongest in terms of survivability and output. So we've kind of given her a little bit of a nerf. Doesn't mean she's bad, or ablative armor isn't still good. It is very good, but the duration is just a lot less. Tactical Hollow Fleet remains pretty much unchanged. So again, very, very useful to deploy all these extra ships. And the sensor triangulation, which, as we know, drops sensors and basically increases your damage. So again, very, very, very good all-round starter hero. Can't really leave home without her. We have tried to push all of the armor types of the heroes in the direction they're supposed to be. So I think that we did actually change Voyager to be the same as the other Intrepids in armor type, but I could be wrong, so I might need to clarify that one. Tom or Rob, if you could check the stats while we move on to the Defiant class, led by the actual Defiant, which is led by Mr. Captain Benjamin Sisko. Again, I think a lot of people drew issue with Sisko as a hero because he had some pretty cheeky tricks, and he's had a few changes as well. He's still a good all-round hero. He still has replicated minefield, but we have tweaked again the damage of the replicating minefield. So they're reasonably powerful, but they won't blow up an entire star base on their own anymore. So, which was one of the problems we had, thankfully. So again, it's still very good. Still has Favour the Bold, good all-round buff to himself. So obviously gives him weapon cooldown, chance to hit, chance to evade, which is the most important one. So 50% chance to evade is amazing. Acceleration and turn rate. And Emissary's Calling, which gives him weapon cooldown, chance to hit. So he's more of a damage dealing hero. He's not really a buffing hero. But I would totally run him, by the way. I think I would run Sisko with a group of Defiants, with a group of Prometheuses, and just go rain on someone's parade. Would you agree, guys?
Yep.
I think he's a very strong hero. Yeah, he's very good in a kind of generic way. He's just very good.
Yeah. He's
to clarify, at the moment, all the heroes are still using capital ship armor.
I thought that was the case. I couldn't remember if I did change it or whether I'd left them as capital ship. So they're still very, very tough then, which is good. Good. I think that was intended. I couldn't remember if I changed it or not. So
I think it is.
Yeah. So there we go. And then we've got the actual USS Enterprise E with Mr. Jean-Luc Picard, who, again, still remains probably one of the best all-round heroes.
He's the best hero for the Federation.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the best in the game, yeah.
So for the person asking earlier, can you still get the Niagara, the other ships? You can still warp in a battle group, which has a chance to bring in some of those ships. He has Inspiring Presence, which, again, gives shield mitigation and shield restore rate to ships around it. It has been reduced because it was very, very strong. Anything with shield mitigation is very, very strong in Sins, so we've lowered that down. And he still has the Corbomite Reflector as well. So, again, all-round strong ship. Definitely worth taking along with you because of Inspiring Presence. But, yeah, that's the heroes. So, nothing much more to say on those. Costs were kind of mentioned. I can kind of demonstrate how the costs have changed. Obviously, I have some of the reductions here because I've done all the research. But you can see like the different ships and their costs. You can see like the Sovereign class costs 3,913 credits at this point with all my research. So it's quite an expensive ship comparison to, say, a Galaxy class, which is 2,782. So we've done a lot of work around the cost of the ships. And you'll see as I just sort of hover over that some ships are cheaper than others depending on the research done. So notice that the Sovereign
and the Roll.
Yeah. And the Roll, yeah. The Sovereign is definitely one of those expensive. The Prometheus is obviously quite expensive. And that's to kind of go along with their power level.
something I would highlight whilst we're looking at these build menus is Orion in the frigates and cruisers tabs, I believe, has gone through and reworked the damage preferences. Orion or Hobbs, maybe possibly even Farb. I can't remember who. There are a lot of people that do a lot of things.
These fleet rolls?
They have updated the fleet rolls.
You mean the fleet rolls that I spent days doing myself, Caesar? You mean that?
Was it Yuki? I do apologise.
Don't credit him. Stop crediting him. No, don't credit him if he did it.
I think we should still praise Orion anyway, since
Orion.
He's the string guy.
Good job, Orion.
Ryan done all the abilities, so you'll notice now on any ability you have this really cool effect and what the ability does, because that was a big complaint that you guys were like, oh, what do these abilities actually do? So now it kind of tells you what they do. So Ryan's been phenomenal in updating every faction with that. So thank you, Ryan. And in terms of, I haven't done a battle yet, but we will show you some effects, I promise, today in the stream. But we really want to give you the faction overview first. So in terms of the cost, you can see that the costs have changed when we hover over the ships. And some ships are very, very expensive. So yeah, lots of changes on there. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You will note there are all these fleet rolls, as we said, what they're good against. So if they're good against a corvette, and that will just help you guys try and learn what things are. Now, unfortunately, we can't do it so that you can hover over a ship and see whether it's a corvette. You're kind of going to have to play the game, learn the factions to learn which ones are corvettes, which ones are cruisers. But you will pick it up, and it will start to make sense, right, Rob? You've played it quite enough now that you know kind of what.
It all kind of happens naturally for me. Like I can look at almost any ship and go, okay, that's this, and it's not that bad once you've played for a while.
Absolutely. So before we go into too much battle scenes, which we want to show you some of the cool new effects, let's just take a little bit to talk about some other parts that make up the Federation faction. We obviously have our Mushroom Star base here. This is the free one that you get when you start on Easy Start. And again, you can give it a number of abilities. I just wanted to recap these. Gravity Well is a great ability that basically allows you to slow down the max speed and the turn rate of ships in the solar system. So if you're in the gravity well, it will just slow down the enemy fleet. So that's quite powerful. Photon Barrage does what it says in the tin, sends out lots of photon torpedoes. And then the Corbomite Reflector, which it is quite famous for, which obviously gives it the damage retaliation, damage reduction. It is still possible to activate this at exactly the right time. If you ever see a Borg progenitor, to actually detonate the progenitor back on itself, which is great.
That's happened to me. It sucks.
So yeah, it's a very, very powerful star base. It can still be in construction. You can still do trade stations on it. But what I will say about star bases is they are now horrendously expensive. So you won't be building these everywhere. So Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about outposts, because we've not really covered this part of the mod yet?
Yeah, I think even in the last version, outposts were made a lot more flexible, and the thing that kept them from really being good was, compared to star bases, they still don't put out too much money or like have too much utility, and also just like compared to having a mobile fleet, they weren't that good. But now the prices have been reduced, and so there's a lot of utility for star bases. And the Federation one specifically, it has the ability to heal other ships very well. It's got decent trade rates, and it's very cheap. So throwing down outposts now, I think, is a very, very good idea. In places you want to hold, they're very useful for buffing your fleet, for healing your fleet, and for getting your guys back out there into the fight.
Yeah, so totally worth building an outpost. So if you need to get a station up quickly, the outpost is the one to go for. If you have the money, because these are quite expensive, these are very, very tanky, but obviously they're not invincible. If people bring on siege ships, they are going to be able to take a starbase down over time. So very, very expensive to build these now, but much cheaper to build outposts. So I think your outpost will be your go-to. However, for worlds you really, really want to protect, so your more valuable worlds, you're probably still going to go for the full mushroom starbase where you can. We're going to talk a little bit about defenses, but these are still due to be reviewed. And Tom is going to be taking another crack at these before we release. So there is, for those of you wondering, like, how close is this? Is it close? We are close, but there's still some fundamental systems we just want to review, and turrets are pretty much one of the areas we still want to look at, right, Tom?
They are part of that, yeah. So as part of the planetary rework, logistics and tactical slots were largely brought down. So unfortunately, for those of you who enjoyed the, I think, like 64 slot Class K adaptables, that is no longer a thing, I'm afraid. So I apologize if I'm breaking any heart. I broke mine fixing that, so but all in the name of balance. Consequently, tactical slots have been lowered as well. One of the things that has been consistent in Sins across a lot of mods is defensive favoritism. In that defense is oftentimes very cheap, very effective, and very heavily affected the pace of gameplay. And this was true to an extent in Armada 3 as well. Turrets were very prevalent and very strong. At one stage, in my naivety, I thought they were too weak, and we got them buffed a little bit. And I now think that was an error of judgment back in my naive youth. However, we still want them to be useful. So the way I'm planning to revise turrets is factional in nature. So factions like the Federation and the Romulans with your split hangar bays and phaser turrets and photon torpedo turrets, they're going to be comparatively cheaper to their Klingon and Cardassian and Borg unified turrets, but they are going to be proportionally weaker as well. So the idea being that you would have a cluster of these turrets that will protect either logistics, or if you want to set them up as a barrier or an obstacle to your opponent. That way you can fairly rapidly deploy them in as an obstacle fashion, or in support of, for example, an outpost or a starbase that you establish to protect more high priority worlds. Because I believe the Federation outpost still has a defense turret boosting ability, which will increase the damage output and range of the turrets close by. So there are still ways that you can then further boost up those turrets, even once their stats are brought down to, in my view, more reasonable levels. With the Klingon, Cardassian, and Borg turrets, of course, they're unified, so all of the relevant damage outputs is on one turret. So whereas the phaser turrets and the photon torpedo turrets are one damage and one damage type, you can have multiple damage types on the multi-turrets. So they will still represent a more singular, strong platform. They'll be a slightly more expensive. They'll take a bit longer to build, so you'd want to build them ahead of an engagement, not necessarily right before it's going to happen. That you might be able to get away with the Federation and Romulans. But given that they still come with the command platform that's a tactical structure as well, which again boosts the damage output and range of these turrets, the more that are close by, you still have the capacity to form defensive strong points within your gravity wells. And this combined with starbases and outposts of which have become more prevalent, you still have the capacity to effectively defend your planets in a way that doesn't quite impede gameplay as much as it has done in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing I want to add really on the turrets is that in Uprising it was possible. We saw a lot of multiplayer players doing this where it was possible because the militia didn't have any planet bombing damage, which is something I regretted in one of my decisions early on in the game, where they would basically capture a well and then just use turrets to clear all the militia out. So they wouldn't even have to take their fleet there.
Yeah, you could do it with one turret, and a turret would cost almost like it was almost equally cheap as a frigate, like a starter frigate. So it was actually more efficient, even money wise, to build that turret. You just fly in, cap the thing, fly the thing out, drag the militia away for a second, pop a turret down, and colonize like that exclusively because turrets were like as strong as capital ships and they're even maybe stronger in their damage output. They were very cancerous.
Yeah. So turrets need a lot of work. What we have done is all the militia will now bomb planets again. So if you try to capture the planet before the militia are dead, they will bomb and do horrendous damage to the planet. So it's not worth trying to capture that planet until you've sufficiently reduced the amount of militia that are bombing it as well. So you've got to fight the militia now, which I think is a good change. I think it's healthy. I think it encourages you to play the mod the way that we intended it to be played. So all in good changes. I will just draw you to the attention that the one from the Federation do get still, which no other faction gets, is the Soul type defense station, or the Hannah Bay, which is ubiquitous in Sins, in stock Sins. But effectively, this is such a great defense station because you can build Valkyries. So it's a great all round, and with the increased damage now that fighter Stratcraft get, fantastic way to protect yourself against enemy carriers. It's very unique to the Federation, so it's totally worth building these as defensive structures. And I'll just draw you to the fact that it has its own shielding ability, and it has a gravitic anchor, which again, if you don't have a starbase, this is fantastic. A lot of people don't realize this is here, but effectively, again, you can use your defense stations to slow the enemy fleet down. So if you've got a very fast, hard-hitting enemy, actually just whacking this on to slow them down by 35% and their turn rate is actually really good, especially if you're being attacked, because a lot of enemies do still have fighter movement require themselves to turn to really bring their firepower to bear. So if you're fighting Romulans or Klingons, this is actually a very, very good ability to use. So fantastic. Finally, I do want to just also, because I like to remind players about the comms arrays. All the comms arrays, which is quite unique, in STA3 also have abilities. And a lot of people forget about them and just kind of leave them there. But again, they're all on autocast, but if you want to, you can actually use these manually as well. And interestingly, the one for the Federation is actually quite good. It actually basically increases warp drive speed for the enemy. So, but what that means, decreases warp drive speed, I should say. Decreases warp drive by 250%. So it actually slows down the enemy jumping to you. So very, very good ability. It's called navigational jamming. Totally worth having to think about and using as well. So I think that kind of covers the core abilities. I did see some pesky bioships that we could go fight to kind of show off. And I'm very excited to see the bioships. I'm not going to take all my fleet there. I think I'm just going to take a few. But effectively, the bioships, we weren't really seeing them in the mod. And what we've done is look at all the militia. So Tom, do you want to just take us through what we've actually done in terms of militia changes and how we've done those in the planetary system now?
Yeah, so in terms of the planetary progression, the planets now scale a little bit more appropriate in terms of value. So whereas in the past, planetary research has been dictated more by the idea of how habitable a planet is in lore, we've instead, primarily for gameplay reasons, I took the decision to orient it so that instead a planet's research progression was more dictated by its gameplay value. So Class M paradises, they're not common in the Star Trek universe in much the same way as in real life. Habitable worlds like Earth are uncommon and very rarely discovered by NASA, for example. And so where they exist in the Star Trek universe, and this is also reflected in many of the shows, these planets are heavily defended. They might be nice to live on, but there will be something very unpleasant waiting to kick you very hard should you try to move in. And so this partly ties into the way in my mind, the system should operate, in that these planets should be strongly defended. So militia types that were previously uncommon or just outright didn't exist, such as Species 8472 bioships, are now present and they will defend Class M Paradise planets. The Huznok, which were meant to spawn, but somewhere along the line, the militia template was not assigned appropriately to any player gravity wells, so they didn't actually spawn in. They will now spawn in, and the Huznok will, if you're not careful, quite happily again beat the arse off of any of your ships if you are not careful. They are nasty.
Yeah.
So the old classics are still present. The Talcats are still there. The Oratium cruisers will still one-shot, I believe, your frigates and cruisers, because nothing says get off my planet like Folians. Trapping your ship and crushing it in a force field.
Yeah. They're just sharing.
But it shouldn't. It should, yeah, exactly. But it shouldn't be to the same scale before, where some of the militia you just didn't bother with until you had enough to steamroll them. The idea is that you should be able to contest all of the militia with, broadly speaking, anything, because they now have unified pirate armor types, and the damage constant for pirates is unified. So it's now more about just what damage output your ship has, rather than thinking about any counters. And so that was a problem in the past, where some ships had really obscure armor, some militia had very obscure armor types, and so you'd go in with a nice big fleet, think, right, this should be fine, and then you'd get your ass kicked and think, how the hell has this happened? I've came in with 40 ships, there's only 5 here, how have I lost? That now won't be the case. And as we go through testing towards our release, where revisions need to be made, we will be making them. So, for example, in terms of the rampant militia, as I discovered earlier today, the numbers there are a bit skewed. So if you thought 5 bioships were a concern, imagine another 23 added onto that because of rampant militia. So that's something that we will be looking to revise down before the release.
Absolutely. So I think we're kind of coming to sort of our final kind of chat really about the Federation overall. Rob, what's your general advice to players when playing against other factions, in particular with the Federation? What's your kind of train of thought when you play Federation overall?
Yeah, so I think the thing with Federation is they have a lot of ships that are very good, but don't necessarily have a heavy excelling at anything particularly. So they have kind of good overall stat lines. They can obviously have the 360-degree firing arc phasers. Their ships can buff each other, but not in the same degrees as some of the other factions. So I think the biggest thing about Federation is just getting up a big, diverse fleet. And in order to do that, you need to use all the economic mechanics that Federation has access to, and they have access to every economic mechanic in the game. So you can get your refineries, you can boost your allegiance, you have the trade to credit conversion, you have sale to credit conversion, you have a lot of tools in your arsenal to get up a superior economy to your opponent, and then use that superior economy to leverage out being able to produce more ships that will eventually overwhelm your opponent. So I think the biggest thing on Federation is expand out, get a big economy, and then get that nice big like end game fleet out. I don't think you should be pushing early on in the game as much. It's really all about that late game fed fleet.
Yeah. So guys, I kind of just going to hand it over to the chat. If you've got any final questions, now's the time to ask, because we're coming to the end of the stream. I think you can see some of the lovely effects and the beams now. Lots more weapons available.
The beams are definitely one of the highlights aesthetically for this release.
Oh, absolutely. Look at those phasers coming in there. The Sovereigns against the Vorcha. Lovely. We've still got a little bit of work to do on the torpedoes, so do expect the torpedoes to also change, because we feel that they don't arc correctly. So that's the kind of detail. You see they're kind of just arced out straight away there, so they're going to curve a lot more nicely in the future. And that's something that we're still working on. But overall, I think this is it's shaping up to be a great version. As I say, I think I have broken. Yes, I have broken it, because I've put on all abilities. So we're going to go a little bit mad now. Let me just turn that off. Instant ability cooldowns, it's not good. So many Miranda clones now. Poor Klingons.
Oh my.
There's a lot of Mirandas there.
Was that Gemini effect?
I mean, that's Gemini effect, yes. When you need Gemini effect, auto casting. Third fleet ships are still in and still summonable, so you will see them. So,
Gemini effect.
yeah. This bubble is not normally that bright. It's because it's pulsing about 80 times at the moment, probably. So, yeah. Any other questions? It's very, very welcome, Andre. We do it out of love for the games, out of love for the mods, and love for Star Trek. So we're always happy to do that. I think the Sword of Kalis just blew up actually. I think she's gone. Yeah. Oh no, she's not. She's nearly gone. There she is.
Unable to comply.
Still one of my favourite Klingon ships, the Sword of Kalis. What a ship. But sadly not quite strong enough to survive this amount of Federation punishment.
Sorry, what was that? I was typing.
I was just saying the Sword of Kalis is one of my favourite Klingon ships, but not strong enough to quite withstand that Federation fleet there.
The Sword of Kalis is my favorite ship. I love that. The Shockwave Torpedo is my favorite ability in the entire game.
So, so
Let's
Doug,
try spinning. That's a good trick.
Another Christmas release, Tom. What do we always say when people ask us about the releases in Stellar Parallax?
I think we're due to release in about 2050 now.
2050. We always add a year on. I mean, it's close. It's very, very close. Otherwise, we wouldn't be live streaming it to you. That's all I'm going to say. Now, it would be nice if we could reach Christmas, but I'm not going to commit to it here on the stream. We want to make sure that we don't miss anything because this is our last chance at making STA free the game it needs to be. So we're very, very much more so concentrating on making sure we don't miss any of the features or updates that we need to push out to make sure that this is the final version. And you know, I have to thank Tom and I have to thank Rob, and I also have to thank Hobbs and the Riot and the rest of the team members, because you got to remember, guys, that they have been working on the other mods as well, a lot of the Stellar Parallax team. But I'm very, very lucky to have Tom and Rob working with me on this edition of STA3 as a smaller team to do what is pretty much a complete rework of the mod. And it's been some very long hours. I think we all agree that we've probably pulled a few hairs out over this one. But it's generally, I feel, a much better edition so far. The Federation... Oh, the Klingons are coming back. The Federation are in a much better place in terms of the mod. I think if you like... if you've always been a UFP fan, you can't go wrong with playing the Feds in STA3. You'll enjoy their general gameplay and their feel of being kind of that good at everything kind of a faction. Not necessarily the best at everything, but good at everything. They've got a bit of everything to offer you, and certainly you can have some great games with your friends with this edition. And it's definitely shaping up to be the best edition yet.
The gameplay, I can just say from playing thousands and thousands of hours of this mod, the gameplay is more fun and more interactive between players than it's ever been before.
Absolutely. So I encourage you guys, if you're not a member of the Star Trek Armada free multiplayer Discord, I'll make sure I stick a link to that in the Stellar Parallax Discord. So you can go over there, you can join Rob and the other guys from the STA3 multiplayer community. So if you've been looking for someone to play with in the evenings and this time, or if you're from the US and you want someone to play with, those guys, a great bunch of guys, mixture of Europe, UK,
US.
and US. You know, just I do encourage you to go join in and play some games with them. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you for the next episode of Prime Directive. But I think that just leaves me to say thank you guys for watching and joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
Take care in the meantime.
Goodbye.